Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Dion. I am the president of the Synergetic Play Therapy Institute, and we're going to be having a discussion today on how to take the information through the other videos that have been available to you about how to manage the intensity that we are experiencing right now in the crisis. And we are going to be offering this to the deaf community for some further support. So I have with me a special guest for this conversation.
Hello, my name is Cody Francisco. I am deaf myself. I'm actually a certified deaf interpreter. I was born and became hearing and became deaf at 9 months. None of my other family members are deaf. I didn't grow up actually signing a whole lot, as I grew up in a rural area in Oklahoma in a small farm town. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. Currently, I work for a language company, language service provider. I'm a senior advisor for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services and other spoken language, specifically in relation to communication access.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. I'm honored to be here.
So as we are talking about how to support the deaf community right now during these challenging times, what would be most helpful?
So during the current pandemic issues, that's what you're referring to? Okay. So over 90%, I'll start with this, of deaf individuals are born to families that are not deaf and who don't actually learn sign language. It's become an extremely marginalized group that becomes very disconnected from those communities around them. And the isolation is quite intense, just as a natural part of being deaf. Parents don't necessarily learn to communicate, brothers and sisters might not learn to communicate, or communication might be very minimal. So oftentimes individuals develop home language, which is obviously not formalized, and the whole situation can be quite oppressive. Oftentimes, deaf individuals get excited to kind of get out of the homes into other environments like college, because then they have access to communication and they get out of the isolation of home and they can socialize in their native language, which is American Sign Language in the United States. So now with all the existing requirements are happening, the stay-at-home orders, the shelters in place, a lot of that kind of has been taken away. There are cultural aspects to being a member of the deaf community where socialization is required for access and for communication. So now, even with the restaurants being closed and being deaf, you can no longer go into a restaurant, you have to go through a drive-through. Well, drive-throughs are actually not very accessible for our community. We struggle to be heard, they don't separate back and forth. We've actually been rejected from drive-throughs. Often drive-thrus require being ordered from a machine that is completely voice or dependent. So the isolation is more intense with this crisis. There's a lot more stress. There's a lot more uncertainty of what we can do. Oftentimes we're seeing a lot of news press and news releases, a lot of information. I am seeing an increase of sign language interpreters there, which we are very happy to see. Unfortunately, not all of those interpreters are qualified due to the last-minute nature of that. So what we're seeing is increased barriers to communication, increased barriers to natural culture taking place. And I know that closed captions obviously are a discussion as well, and why do they need American Sign Language interpreters, but English and written English is often not the first language of the deaf community. Our native language is sign language. So often, even in captions, when we rely on that, those aren't always accurate as well. So again, these are all examples of just increased stress that the deaf community is experiencing, increased communication not being as clear as it normally is. We had an experience where one county locally put a signer on the news. And I use that word specifically as signer because they're not an interpreter and they're not able to handle the severity and complicated communication that was taking place. And obviously it was important information, and the deaf community didn't get that information because what was being said in sign language was not what was actually being said in English. The example that I'm using here from a local county, an interpreter is actually telling the deaf community to go to church when that is not actually what was being said at all. So there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of risk that we're feeling. Where can we feel safe? Where's our safe space? What do we do in these situations because we're getting miscommunication? We have to work every day for our own safety to know what's going on. And the importance of all of that is that within our social groups is home. And now home is being taken away. We're disconnected. We don't have access to quality interpreting services now. We're not getting access to the appropriate information at times. All these different things that now were being provided are being taken away. So the anxiety that is rippling through the deaf community, the pressure that we're feeling is significant. Oftentimes, families going back to the home environment or family members are not necessarily even able to express or support a deaf family member because they don't have that same experience. They don't know what it's like to have that communication taken away or have those barriers all of a sudden raised. So that experience is missing, obviously, the majority, and it's difficult to communicate. And that's why often the deaf community, they'll call each other. You'll see a lot of increased call and trying to collect more information. So the community, in a sense, is trying to take care of its own. Maybe one person had access to information and that information gets passed around. I've actually had people call me directly because I'm certified, I'm a deaf interpreter, and they asked me to clarify something that they've actually seen or they read in English because they didn't really understand the total message or the captions were not available. So a lot of that communication passing is happening, and I feel that we should and owe it to the community, be accountable to the community to give access so they can be safe at home.
So with what you just shared, which is a really big deal, is the question in there, what can individuals in the deaf community do right now to manage the anxiety and to manage the isolation? Is that what you'd like me to speak to?
Yes, I think I'm just trying to think about just in my home, like I do care about my family, but how can we feel as a community feel safe? What can we do even though we're experiencing this increased barriers around us, this increased uncertainty, because we don't have the same type of accessibility that our family members might? What are things that we can do as a community to just feel more at ease, to know that even in midst of this crisis, what can we do? I know there's certain things that are available, we have access to some, but yeah, my question would more pertain to what can we do for ourselves in order to increase our own safe space?
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful question. So I want to normalize something that I'm hearing you share that is deeply felt amongst the deaf community. And then from there, we can talk about things that you can do. So one of the, we'll talk about it as threats to the brain. So one of the things that the brain is actually scanning for to give the brain a sense of safety has to do with incongruence in the environment. So when we experience incongruence in an environment, it actually creates a sense of anxiety in the system because it's important for us to be able to make sense, to be able to predict, to be able to track patterns. And right now, I mean, in general, there's a lot of incongruence in the environment, but right now it's really heightened. And so right now, you're having to rely a lot on reading nonverbal cues, probably at an even higher level, probably having to tune in at an even higher level. And what's super challenging is that what you're tuning into isn't actually reliable. And so there's a whole other level of disorientation that can happen. So you said something that's really, really important, which is the community in and of itself attempting to come together to create support. And I think that is key. However, that can happen as much as possible because there is a shared understanding of what the experience is like. And separate from that, there's the deeper question, which is what can be done individually to be able to manage the high levels of stress and intensity that are being experienced right now. It's really common when we become afraid that we orient outside of ourselves for a sense of safety. And this is even more challenging right now. And so the real safety is actually with our relationship with ourselves in any given moment. And this is where the regulating actually becomes key. So it begins with allowing yourself to become aware that you're even having an experience, because not everyone's even aware that they're having an experience. We can disconnect and sort of shut off and kind of want to just pretend like we're fine. But right now it's really important that we don't. It's important that there's an allowance of noticing, oh my gosh, I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, I'm mad, I feel trapped, I feel abandoned, I feel whatever that is, and to actually allow that experience to be present. And then the next step is, how do I have a relationship with it? Because it's one thing to feel isolated and rejected from a community. It's another thing to isolate and reject from yourself, which actually increases the feeling of isolation and increases the feeling of disconnect. And so allowing yourself in those moments to be able to ask yourself, what do I need right now? What does my body need right now? How do I manage this right now? Do I need to breathe? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to put pressure on my body and remind myself that I'm here and I'm actually safe in this moment because look, I can grab hold of myself and I'm okay in this moment? Do I need to listen to my own inner voice that tells me deep down that I'm okay? Do I need to find different ways of orienting to things that feel meaningful to me in the moment? Do I need to go take a shower and just feel the safety of the water on my body? Do I need to wrap myself in a blanket and actually just feel the comfort of the blanket wrapped around me? Do I need to drink a cup of tea and find the soothing experience of the warmth of the tea going down my throat? It's these little things, but we can't begin to do them unless we allow ourselves permission to feel and to acknowledge. And then it's beginning to regulate through that. A key piece of understanding of how to move through this crisis right now is it's not about making the bad feelings go away. It's about developing a relationship with them so that we stay connected to ourselves as we experience the waves of dysregulation, as we experience the waves. That's ultimately where the greatest form of safety is, in addition to trying to find those ways where community can come together, even though it's even more difficult right now. But truly, the greatest sense of safety is our relationship with ourselves in those moments, and asking, what do I need and what does my body need right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's significant for the deaf and hard of hearing community to connect with that, because the community values intimate relationship. Just because American Sign Language is a visual language. The community is very collectivist in the sense that we view each other as a family. There's a lot of physical contact involved of hugging. There's a lot of consistent contact and communication and relationship. So at this time, as we reflect, we've always had video phone calls. That's how we actually make phone calls with our family members. We can call them through this technology that we have. It's important to remind ourselves that we do have some of these available still, but just during this time, and maybe remind ourselves that it's temporary, and reminding ourselves, like you said, to connect. Just like those old times when we were excited about, seeing each other a while ago, maybe we can rekindle some of that and have those connections with the people around us, and that might help. And reassuring ourselves that we will get together again. So I think it's really important for the deaf and hard of hearing community to be reminded of that, especially as they experience those barriers around them, that maybe we do have other resources available and technology available to give us a little bit more of that inspiration that we need to kind of get through. That's kind of how I'm doing it myself a little bit at this point. I don't have family that lives there in the state right now. I don't have a lot of people around me that communicate with me in my native language, but connecting with myself, as you were saying, and trying to connect with others in every way that I can seems the way I need to go, as you said, to remind myself that I'm okay. And we do have a sense of accountability in the community for each other as well.
There's really two pieces of this whole puzzle that we're both speaking to. One is, we are social creatures, and we do need social interaction. It's so important to our well-being. And so I love the reminder that you're offering of, even though we're home, there are still ways to connect. And can we remember and creatively use those resources? And then the other one is also normalizing that not only is there just the general activation of the stress response that everyone is experiencing, but also I think there's also the normalization that there's an even added challenge for the deaf community, and that whatever you are experiencing is actually really normal. It's nothing to be ashamed about. If you are having moments of rage, if you're having moments of agitation, if you're having moments of overwhelming anxiety, it makes sense. And then if you're going the other way and you're wanting to shut down and you're collapsing and you're feeling depressed, like that's really normal too. And it's the body talking, saying, hey, I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed. And I just think there's an added message of, let's listen to what the body's saying and recognize that the body's so wise, and can we respond thoughtfully and give ourselves something that may feel safe and comforting in those moments, and learn how to stay connected through that instead of disconnecting from it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was speaking with some family who have children at home. And like I said, 90% of deaf children are born to families that are not deaf, and oftentimes don't learn to communicate in the native way that deaf people need. So deaf children tend to pick up language with their classmates when they go to school. And so I've always told parents, now is your time. Now is an opportunity to, while you have your child at home, while you have these people around you, to be creative in your connections. Because I do remember with my parents, they always told me they wish they had more time. Right? They wish we had more time. They wish they could have communicated better with me and some of these other things. And now that all of us are at home with each other, I just feel like maybe this is an opportunity to be creative in our connections. And like you just said, we already have kind of what we need. We're in our homes. I don't even see different colors. You can maybe ask a child in a deaf context, what's the color sign for this color, and develop language communication with each other. I really think that is important to add, just seizing the opportunity as it's here while your children are at home or while we're with each other, and to appreciate this as an opportunity, because it is temporary, it is limited, and I think that can be very, very beneficial.
One of the other things that when I talk with families around this too, that I really help parents understand is that even though their child may not be able to hear them, they can feel them. and the child.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important that the parents are actually really authentic and congruent, because I can share a lot about what's going on with me without even using my words. We can have a whole conversation that's just based on nonverbals. I mean, that's why the intimacy is so important. And I think sometimes parents don't realize how significant their nonverbals are, and how you really can develop a relationship with someone without using language, verbal language at all. And you can have the deepest levels of intimacy. I mean, I think about the attunement between a caregiver and an infant. You know, there's a language. It's not necessarily a spoken language. And there is, as you're saying, there's a real opportunity right now to go back into that level of relationship, because that also creates, I mean, that's a huge experience of safety relationally. And so if parents can recognize, what would it be like to actually attempt to communicate on a whole other level without relying on your own verbal capacity? Like how creative could you get? Dance with your children, deeply look at your children in their eyes, touch your children, make up games with your child, and then together create a language that is between the both of you. And it is, I think now more than ever, is such a beautiful time to do that, because in the home, between the parent and the child, that's what's going to create the safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's good.
Mm-hmm. So as we're having this conversation, are there other pieces that would feel helpful, or do you feel like those are some really key pieces and some really good reminders for the deaf community for now?
Yeah, so we were talking about maybe in understanding the emotions that we're experiencing as we were talking about when we first started this conversation. I'd like to shift the perspective a little bit and maybe ask you, how will we go about understanding or communicating to somebody else what we're experiencing or what we're feeling? So now, as you were just saying, going through the points about regulation, how can we go around and communicate that to others? If I'm experiencing some of this dysregulation or this unsafety, what would your suggestions be in ways of trying to get someone else to understand that from my perspective?
So, and are you asking more like if you're in the home and you want someone in your home to understand what you're going through, or in a different environment?
I think it's just more referring to more in a general sense. So suppose I become really frustrated because I attempt to go through a drive-through and I'm denied service because I have to go through there. And I'm already feeling stressed, already feeling oppressed, and I have this trigger situation. Or if I'm in a work environment, how can I communicate this and understand, even on the opposite side, what another person? So at home, I know that sometimes people may not understand an individual experience. So if I express myself and how I'm feeling and noticing my own pattern behaviors, what would your recommendations to how to get someone else to understand those things that I need to regulate, or as I identify what needs to be regulated?
So my guess is that there's an intuitive process with this, already for individuals in the deaf community, in that things really have to come through the body, and things really have to come through the nonverbals. At home, if it's a
and I'm sorry, I will say that the deaf community, we can just connect with someone really easily or identify certain nonverbals pretty easily. It's a survival technique that we've developed in our whole community. Usually we can tell pretty easily if someone is maybe perhaps not being as authentic as they are thinking they are. We just learned skills to identify, the authenticity of a situation in a people. That's just something, an adapted cultural skill that we have in communicating through visual and nonverbals. It's almost like a felt intuition that we have. And even if I don't know the other person.
Exactly. That's why I had shared at the beginning that right now your attunement with the incongruence in the environment is even further heightened, because it's actually one of the most beautiful skill sets to have, and it is one of the skills because you've had to adapt for sure. So so really recognizing that other people may not be as attuned, but they're still picking up on the nonverbals. And so what we do with our own bodies does impact other, and finding a way to express with our bodies, if we can make sound, if we are able to, draw, if we're able to write, if we're able to, there's ways that we can still communicate. And I think the important thing is recognizing that even in the attempt to communicate, there still may be the experience of not understood. And there still may be that experience of, oh, they missed me. I didn't get seen. I didn't get acknowledged. And then it comes back to and how do I stay connected to me in that? And recognize that that's a limitation of other, not a reflection of me and my worth or my being or my okayness in the moment. And so it's that dance between trying and recognizing that the more congruent we are in the attempt, the higher the probability that it actually will be recognized. Because if we're incongruent, then that's going to send mixed messages. And then recognizing that at the end of the day, someone's gonna read it or not. And then we have to come back to creating our own sense of inner safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I do tend to tell my other deaf colleagues, per se. The attempt to communicate, the attempt to sense to somebody else, oftentimes it may seem like we're not getting through, but it could be at a sacrifice of the other person's comfort. Maybe they're not comfortable, but at the end of the day, I have to decide for myself, based on their response, am I going to be angry? Am I going to be frustrated? And eventually I've come to realize that the problem is not with me. I don't have a problem communicating. I've expressed myself. I've expressed in ways that I can. It might be the other person, they're struggling, might be their problem. And going through that process not to blame myself in that, and that I'm okay, and that what I share is shared. If what I share ends up providing stress to somebody else, then I've learned to try to be okay with that in some regards.
It's interesting, as we're even speaking this is one of the things that I share with therapists and mental health professionals that I train, because even with speech, there's even the opportunity for being misunderstood, even with verbal language. And at the end of the day, it's still the process of how do we come back here in our own authenticity, and how do we stay connected to ourselves in the midst of all of the different, activation. I will throw out one thing, in the event that there's a parent or someone that's watching this who has a child that is deaf. One of the most beautiful messages that I've seen is the show me message. So if a child is clearly attempting to communicate and the parent is finding themselves frustrated because they're not understanding, it's an amazing thing to be able to look at a child and give the message of show me, right? Just show me, whether it's taking their hand and putting their hand in your hand and like, show me, help show me, or drawing it, or, pushing on something, or making, something, but just that invitation to not have to rely always on the verbal language. And there is this invitation of, show me, I'm listening, and I'm listening with my whole body. And I'm listening with all my senses right now to be able to understand and feel what you're trying to communicate with me, I think is such an important place for parents to come from, if they have someone in the home that is deaf.
I think it is really important that the parents learn to regulate their own feelings and maintain, a homeostasis of calm, as to avoiding sort of emotional transfer, I guess. I like the idea, or I found the idea that works, of providing options in the show me method, as you were saying. So, okay, this or this, like, how would you know if they're hungry? You could maybe show me some food. How do you know if they want something to drink? Show them juice or water, or perhaps they want to watch a movie. Show them which specific movies might be available options. Maybe they want to watch a specific TV show. Hand them the remote. Let them guide you through their process. Maybe the sign language might not be there. But then they might not be able to write a specific show, but like you said, they can show you, and I think the parents, that's an ideal opportunity for parents to take advantage of that opportunity and use those to apply to general communication they have in the home.
So I think a last piece that will be helpful as we're rounding out this really beautiful conversation, so thank you. You mentioned this idea of the parents staying calm, and I want to elaborate on that just a little bit, because it's a little in line also with when we start to get activated, and then what happens in us. I think a more useful word than calm is poised, because sometimes calm for some people registers as I have to pretend like I'm not feeling something, or I have to kind of push that feeling away. And then I have to take on this sort of like, no, I'm calm, but I'm really not calm. And to what you've been saying, one of the gifts in the deaf community is the ability to read nonverbal cues. If a parent is acting calm, but they're not actually calm, it's actually going to read as another level of incongruence in the environment. It doesn't work.
And they will know.
They will know.
You'll know you are not calm.
So it's more about being poised and grounded and frustrated at the same time, or poised and grounded. It's almost like a calm presence in the midst of all the activation.
Like an inner stability?
Like an inner stability, exactly. Like an inner poise, an inner grounding, but I'm still honest and truthful about the fact that I am struggling as well. So that when someone looks at me and they read me, I'm very congruent. They can see me regulated and dysregulated at the same time, where I'm not denying my experience or pushing something away. And I think that is so huge for us to understand that that's also the goal for us with our own safety. Can I be regulated and dysregulated at the same time? I don't need to deny a certain part of my experience. I really just get to be human right now in whatever it is that I'm going through, and that creates safety inside.
It does. I agree. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Really beautiful conversation.
It's a wonderful experience. Thank you, Lisa.
And I hope that there's some valuable information here to support the community as we're going through this really challenging time right now.
Yeah, again, and I think it's really important that this current crisis is temporary, and we are having common experiences, and it's important to emphasize. We might have different approaches, but I do think it's all going to work out to our betterment. And like I said, I think now is the time. Now is our opportunity to practice some of these things, and maybe even get caught up with those that we love around us, just because we won't always have this time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
I agree. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Really beautiful conversation.
It's a wonderful experience. Thank you, Lisa.
And I hope that there's some valuable information here to support the community as we're going through this really challenging time right now.
Yeah, again, I think it's really important that this current crisis is temporary and we are having common experiences, and it's important to emphasize. We might have different approaches, but I do think it's all going to work out to our betterment. And like I said, I think now is the time, now is our opportunity to practice some of these things and maybe even get caught up with those that we love around us, just because we won't always have this time.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.